Elena Moreau stood before the full-length mirror in her childhood bedroom, watching her reflection blur through unshed tears. The ivory silk dress hung perfectly on her slender frame, its delicate lace sleeves catching the afternoon light that streamed through the windows of the family estate. In 3 hours, she would walk down the aisle of St. Catherine's Cathedral to marry a man she had spoken to exactly 4 times. The Moreau Art Gallery had been her family's pride for 3 generations. Her great-grandfather had started it with nothing but passion and a keen eye for emerging talent. Her grandfather had expanded it into one of Boston's most respected cultural institutions. Her father, James Moreau, had maintained its reputation with dedication and integrity that bordered on stubbornness. But integrity, Elena had learned, didn't pay mounting debts or prevent foreclosure notices. The economic downturn had been merciless. Collectors stopped buying, investors pulled out, and the gallery's prime location in the Back Bay became a financial burden rather than an asset. Elena had watched her father age years in months, his salt and pepper hair turning completely white, as he tried desperately to save the legacy his family had built. "There's another way," her mother Vivienne had said one evening over dinner that none of them had touched. "The Cross family has made an offer." Elena had looked up from her untouched soup, confused. "An offer for the gallery?" "An offer for you," her mother had replied quietly. The silence that followed was deafening. Elena's spoon clattered against the porcelain bowl as the words sank in. The Cross family was Boston's tech royalty. Damien Cross had built his software empire from nothing, revolutionizing how people communicated across the globe. His mother, Victoria Cross, was known for her strategic mind and her ability to turn business deals into social advantages. "You can't be serious," Elena had whispered. "They need legitimacy," her father had said, his voice barely audible. "Old money respectability, and we need salvation." The arrangement was presented as a merger of families, a joining of old Boston culture with new money innovation. Elena would marry Damien Cross in a ceremony that would be covered by society magazines. The Cross family would absorb the gallery's debts and ensure its continued operation. Elena would become the wife of one of the city's most eligible bachelors, living in luxury beyond anything she had ever known. What they didn't mention was that it would feel like selling her soul. Elena had met Damien Cross 4 times before their wedding day. The first meeting had been at a formal dinner at his family's Beacon Hill mansion. He had been polite but distant, asking her about her work as an interior designer with the same tone one might use to inquire about the weather. He was undeniably handsome, with dark hair that he kept perfectly styled and gray eyes that seemed to see everything while revealing nothing. The second meeting had been at the gallery itself. Damien had walked through the exhibition halls with his hands clasped behind his back, studying the paintings with an intensity that surprised her. When he paused before a particular piece, a haunting landscape painted by a local artist who had died young, Elena had found herself explaining the brushwork and the story behind the painting. For a moment, she had seen something flicker in his eyes, something that looked almost like interest. But then Victoria Cross had called his name, and the moment had passed. Their third meeting had been the formal engagement announcement at the Cross family's country club. Elena had worn a navy dress that Victoria had selected, and Damien had slipped a diamond ring onto her finger that was worth more than the gallery's annual insurance premium. The ring was beautiful, but it felt like a shackle. They had posed for photographs, Damien's hand resting lightly on her waist, both of them smiling for the cameras while maintaining a careful distance from each other. The fourth and final meeting, before their wedding, had been to discuss the terms of their arrangement. They had sat in Victoria Cross's study, surrounded by leather-bound books and family portraits that dated back generations. The conversation had been conducted like a business negotiation, which Elena supposed it was. "You'll have your own wing of the house," Victoria had explained, sliding a floor plan across the mahogany table. "Complete privacy." Damien's work requires him to travel frequently, so you'll have ample time to pursue your own interests. And what about... Elena had begun, then stopped, unsure how to phrase the question that was burning in her mind. Personal expectations? Victoria had finished smoothly. There are none. This is a partnership, not a romance. You're both adults who understand the practical nature of this arrangement. Damien had said nothing during the entire meeting, but Elena had caught him watching her with an expression she couldn't read. When she had finally worked up the courage to meet his gaze directly, he had looked away. Now, as Elena stood in her wedding dress, she wondered if she was making the biggest mistake of her life. She had always imagined her wedding day would be filled with joy and anticipation, not this hollow feeling of resignation. She had dreamed of marrying someone who looked at her the way her father looked at her mother after 30 years of marriage, with love and warmth and genuine affection. Instead, she was about to marry a stranger who treated her like a business acquisition. "You look beautiful, sweetheart," her father said from the doorway. James Moreau's eyes were bright with unshed tears, and Elena could see the weight of guilt in his shoulders. "I'm so sorry it has to be this way." "It's not your fault, Papa," Elena said, turning to embrace him. "We're saving the gallery. Great-grandfather would understand." But even as she said the words, Elena wondered if she truly believed them. The ceremony was elegant and impersonal. St. Catherine's Cathedral was filled with Boston's elite, all dressed in their finest clothes and wearing carefully neutral expressions. Elena walked down the aisle on her father's arm, her bouquet of white roses trembling slightly in her hands. At the altar, Damien waited in a perfectly tailored black tuxedo, his face composed and unreadable. When the priest asked if they took each other as husband and wife, they both said "I do" with voices that carried no emotion. When Damien lifted her veil to kiss her, his lips barely brushed hers. The kiss was so brief and formal that Elena wondered if it had happened at all. The reception was held at the Cross family estate, a sprawling mansion that had been in the family for generations. Elena moved through the evening like she was watching someone else's life unfold. She danced with her new husband to a string quartet's rendition of "The Way You Look Tonight," but they barely spoke. She cut the wedding cake with Damien's hand covering hers on the knife, both of them smiling for the photographer while maintaining their careful emotional distance. As the evening wound down and the last guests departed, Elena found herself alone, with Damien in the mansion's grand foyer. The silence stretched between them like an ocean. "Rosa will show you to your rooms," Damien said finally, gesturing to the elderly housekeeper who had appeared at their side. "I hope you'll be comfortable here." "Thank you," Elena replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'll be leaving for Singapore tomorrow morning," he continued, adjusting his cufflinks with practiced efficiency. "A business trip that was scheduled months ago. I'll be gone for 2 weeks." Elena nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Even on their wedding night, he was leaving her. "Rosa will help you get settled," he added. "If you need anything, just ask her." And then he was gone, disappearing up the grand staircase without a backward glance, leaving Elena standing in her wedding dress in the foyer of a house that was supposed to be her home, but felt more like a beautiful prison. Rosa, a kind woman, in her 60s with gentle eyes and calloused hands, led Elena through the mansion's corridors to what would be her new living space. The East Wing was indeed beautiful, with high ceilings, antique furniture, and windows that overlooked the estates. Manicured gardens. Her bedroom was larger than the entire living room of her childhood home, with a 4-poster bed draped in silk and a sitting area arranged around a marble fireplace. "Mr. Cross wanted to make sure you had everything you needed," Rosa said, opening the walk-in closet to reveal an entire wardrobe that had been selected and purchased without Elena's input. "He had a decorator come in last week to prepare everything." Elena ran her fingers along the silk dresses and cashmere sweaters, all in colors that someone had decided would suit her. It was thoughtful in a way, but it also felt like further evidence that she was expected to become someone else, to fit into a life that had been designed for her rather than chosen by her. "The library is just down the hall," Rosa continued, "and there's a small studio on the third floor that Mr. Cross thought you might like to use for your design work." "He thought of that?" Elena asked, surprised. "He asked me what you might need to feel at home," Rosa admitted. "He seemed concerned that you'd be comfortable here." It was a small thing, but it was the first indication Elena had received that Damien Cross might actually think of her as more than just a business arrangement. Maybe, she thought, there was more to her new husband than his carefully controlled exterior suggested. That night, Elena lay alone in her enormous bed, still wearing her wedding dress because she couldn't bear to take it off yet. Through the thin walls, she could hear the faint sound of piano music drifting from somewhere in the house. The melody was haunting and beautiful, filled with a sadness that made her chest ache. She wondered if Damien was playing, and if so, what the music meant to him. Did he always play so late at night? Was this how he expressed the emotions he kept, so carefully hidden during the day? Elena closed her eyes and listened to the music, feeling for the first time since agreeing to this arrangement that maybe, just maybe, there was hope for something real to grow between them. The melody seemed to speak of longing and loss, of desires that couldn't be put into words. As the last notes faded into silence, Elena made herself a promise. She would give this marriage a real chance. She would try to understand the man she had married, to find the person behind the careful facade. And maybe, if she was very lucky, she would discover that Damien Cross was worth the sacrifice she had made. The next morning, Elena woke to find a single white rose on her nightstand, with no note or explanation. When she asked Rosa about it, the housekeeper simply smiled and said that Mr. Cross had left for the airport very early. It was a small gesture, but it filled Elena with something that felt dangerously close to hope. The first month of Elena's marriage passed like a dream she couldn't wake up from. Damien returned from Singapore with a tan that made his gray eyes even more striking, but the distance between them remained as vast as the ocean he had crossed. He brought her a small silk scarf from his travels, presenting it to her over breakfast with the same polite detachment he might show a business associate. "Thank you," Elena had said, fingering the delicate fabric. "It's beautiful." "The shopkeeper said it matched your eyes," Damien replied, then immediately looked away as if regretting the personal observation. Their daily routines developed like separate rivers flowing through the same landscape, never quite meeting. Damien left for his downtown office before 7 each morning, often returning after Elena had already retired to her room. She spent her days exploring the mansion, working in the small studio he had prepared for her, and slowly building a relationship with Rosa, who seemed to be the only person in the house willing to engage in actual conversation. "He's not always been so distant," Rosa confided one afternoon as they arranged flowers in the main hall. "Before his father died, Mr. Cross was different, more open. He used to laugh at my terrible jokes and help me with the grocery lists." "What happened to change him?" Elena asked, genuinely curious about the man who shared her name but little else. Rosa's face clouded. "His father's death hit him hard, and then there was the accident with Miss Sophia." "Sophia?" Elena's hands stilled on the white lilies she was arranging. Rosa looked as if she had said too much. "Perhaps it's not my place to tell that story, Mrs. Cross, but I will say this. Your husband has been protecting his heart for a very long time. Sometimes protection becomes a prison." That evening, Elena found herself walking through the mansion's halls with new eyes, looking for traces of the man Damien had been before grief had frozen him into the controlled stranger she had married. In his study, she discovered a photograph tucked behind others on his desk. A younger Damien with his arm around a woman with auburn hair and a radiant smile. They looked happy, carefree, completely absorbed in each other. Elena studied the photograph for a long time, feeling an unexpected stab of jealousy toward a woman she had never met. What had happened to Sophia? And why did the sight of Damien's genuine smile in the photograph make her chest ache with something that felt like loss? The piano music continued every night, usually starting around 11 and lasting until the early hours of the morning. Elena began timing her evening routine to coincide with the concerts, finding excuses to move through the halls so she could hear the melodies more clearly. The music was always beautiful, but it carried an undercurrent of sadness that seemed to seep through the walls and settle in her bones. One night, curiosity finally overcame caution. Elena slipped out of her room and followed the sound through the mansion's corridors until she found its source, a music room she hadn't discovered in her previous explorations. The door was slightly ajar, and through the gap she could see Damien seated at a black grand piano, his fingers moving across the keys with practiced ease. He had changed out of his business suit into dark jeans and a simple white shirt, his sleeves rolled up to reveal strong forearms. His hair, usually so perfectly styled, had fallen across his forehead, and his entire posture was different, relaxed, vulnerable, real. This was not the controlled businessman she had married. This was someone else entirely. The melody he was playing was one Elena didn't recognize, but it spoke to her in ways that words never could. It was a conversation between hope and despair, between longing and resignation. As she watched, she saw Damien's shoulders tense, his fingers pressing harder against the keys as the music built to a crescendo that seemed to contain all the emotion he kept locked away during the day. Elena was so absorbed in watching him that she didn't notice Rosa approaching, until the older woman cleared her throat softly. "He plays beautifully, doesn't he?" Rosa whispered. Elena jumped, her heart racing. "I shouldn't be watching. I should go back to my room." "He composed that piece himself," Rosa continued as if Elena hadn't spoken. "Started working on it about 3 years ago, but he's never been able to finish it. Says he can't find the right ending." 3 years ago? Elena calculated quickly. That would have been around the time of their engagement, when their families had first begun negotiations. "He's been searching for something," Rosa said softly. "Maybe now he'll find it." Elena returned to her room that night with her mind spinning. The controlled, distant man she had married was apparently capable of creating music that could make her soul ache. What other depths was he hiding? And why did she suddenly care so much about finding out? The next few days brought an unexpected intimacy to their polite coexistence. Elena began leaving small signs that she had been listening to his music. A cup of herbal tea outside the music room door, a note thanking him for the beautiful melodies, fresh flowers arranged in a vase near the piano. She never saw his reaction to these gestures, but they always disappeared by morning. Then came the evening that changed everything. Elena had been feeling unwell all day, fighting off what seemed to be the flu. By dinner time, she was running a fever and could barely keep her eyes open. Rosa had insisted she go to bed early, bringing her soup and tea that Elena was too nauseous to consume. She must have fallen asleep because the next thing she knew, someone was placing a cool cloth on her forehead. Elena's eyes fluttered open to find Damien sitting on the edge of her bed, his face creased with concern. "Your fever is quite high," he said softly, his usual formal tone replaced by something gentler. Rosa wanted to call a doctor. "I'm fine," Elena managed, though her voice was barely a whisper. "Just tired?" "You're not fine," Damien replied, and there was something in his voice that made Elena look at him more closely. His gray eyes held a warmth she had never seen before, and his hand, as he adjusted the cloth on her forehead, was surprisingly gentle. "Have you eaten anything today?" he asked. Elena shook her head, immediately regretting the movement as it made. The rooms spin. I'll get you some broth, Damien said, starting to rise. You don't have to, Elena protested weakly. Rosa can... Rosa has been taking care of everyone else in this house for decades, Damien interrupted. Let me take care of you. The words hung in the air between them, carrying a weight that seemed to surprise them both. For a moment, Elena thought she saw something flicker across Damien's face. Surprise, perhaps, or recognition. Then it was gone, replaced by the careful mask he usually wore, but his actions spoke louder than his expression. For the next 3 days, while Elena battled the flu, Damien was a constant presence. He brought her meals, checked her temperature, and even read to her from a collection of poetry when she was too weak to hold a book herself. His voice, she discovered, was beautiful when he wasn't guarding it, warm and rich, with an accent that hinted at his childhood in Ireland before his family had immigrated to Boston. "Why are you doing this?" Elena asked on the 3rd day, when she was finally feeling human again. Damien was sitting in the chair beside her bed, reading from a volume of Emily Dickinson.